It uses Indigenous methods in making film. My daughter has worked in Indigenous filmmaking for several years now, and this is probably about, I think, the third film that she made. She was working as the director of Imaginative, an Indigenous film festival in Toronto, and so was being exposed to all these Indigenous filmmakers and the methods they were using to make film. And one thing she got really interested in was making films with non-actors. So then she branched off into working with community youth. So this film that I'm going to show you is on teen pregnancy. How she went about making the film. We did a 3-day theater workshop, got the kids into their bodies, got them that nervous energy out of them about being in their body. And then my daughter took over and did, I think, 2 to 3 more days with them, doing some specific director-actor techniques. And then basically made the film in a week.
My auntie swears by this. Definitely a girl.
See? Clockwise.
Feels 60. You know what that means? Oh, look at you, you're so little.
No syy. Ei pitse mitään oma, ei voi. Mutta tommonen kauhean nostikin tahopetit. Mutta ei vaspatit niin kauhean. Iko ministeri waspusuanuta. Iko minagidi wasputega wainuta apsissin. Iko kepipe mo wada sutam tapos ita wasputatuta.
You can't take this.
Kada gustot tapos ita inursum.
Who are like, their films are like 10 to 15 minutes on domestic violence, when I watched this one on the Imaginative program, it was programmed with one from the territories on domestic violence, one on, I can't remember now all the different topics, but there are about 5 different really good health topics that were addressed from an Indigenous perspective, and most of them are available through VT. But I really think that our film festivals are untapped educational resources that we're not using enough.
It's beautifully done. It's amazing. We'll to end. Next chapter. So we make a long version now.
That's what good short films do.
What was amazing was those were all first-time actors, and it was so natural. I mean, I don't think that there was any hint of acting behind that. It felt very real and genuine.
We had been fortunate enough to receive funding from the Humanities Research Institute at the University of Regina. That's funny, my kindred spirit there, Rose Jolly, as kindred spirits, weird English teachers who do health stuff using arts-based things, and like, yeah, I don't know anybody else really.
No,
does
I
that.
don't, internationally, I don't know anybody else that looks like us.
No.
Professionally.
Really
Just
weird.
weird.
Yeah.
So, my connection to Saskatchewan is very familiar because in 1981, when I was 17, I just turned 50, so you don't have to try and figure out the math. Okay, I'll just do it for you because it's late at night. My parents were thrown out of South Africa because they were anti-apartheid, which meant that they were not that fond of the government that was in power that was suppressing black people. Now, South Africa is very different from Canada in terms of the racial picture in one respect, and that is that there were only 5 million whites suppressing what was then about 40 million blacks, and which is now probably about 56 million blacks. South Africa has 12 national languages, and it's a complex picture because some of the colonized languages are actually Indigenous languages. The area I work in has, South Africa has the highest rate of new infections in the world. It also has the highest rate of deaths in the world from HIV still. The area I work in has an antenatal rate of 49.9%. That means nearly 50% of the women who are tested because they're pregnant are HIV positive. Okay? So when you work in South Africa, you don't, in a sense, in the area that I work in anyway, you don't, in a sense, work with AIDS. You work in an HIV/AIDS environment. But around 2001 or 2, I started to get really angry because the American Congress came out with its funding for AIDS, which was abstain, be faithful, condomize, ABC, they call it. They've now given up on some of that. But that was the model for the intervention in South Africa. And I knew perfectly well that women, especially in the rural areas, had no way to abstain because their husbands and other people were demanding sex from them. I knew that they could be faithful, but if their partners weren't, it wasn't going to get them anywhere. And I knew that if they asked to use a condom, often their partners would say, "What have you been doing that we have to use a condom?" There's also the other side of that story where I've had a 70-year-old man say to me, I need to use a condom with my wife, but I'm now in this marriage for 50 years. How do I do this? What do I say? You know, so it works both ways, right? it's contained within the home. And for me, a lot of what we call domestic violence is related to systemic cycles through the generations of patriarchy. So in South Africa, one of the ways that Britain colonized South Africa, Southern Africa, Kenya as well actually, was to make alliances with men against women. My students speak to me, there's two things they don't get about, in my mind, about gender-based violence in these kinds of intergenerational, colonial and post-colonial contexts. The first is that they tend to be very moralistic. So they say, well, why doesn't X just leave her husband? Okay? What they don't understand is we all crave intimacy, even if it's not positive intimacy. And I think that that has a lot to do with the kind of things that the film was talking about, which is the creation of certain ideas and fantasies about intimacy. And the reality just falls so short of that, but we cling to that. But one of the things that is really, really similar is when you look at the statistics, and Saskatoon and Regina being amongst the highest. Okay? So if you look at the statistics for 2009 for Saskatchewan, there were about 200 and some registered, 250 or so registered cases of HIV, and under 40 of them were white and the rest were Aboriginal. Okay? And then you look at the intergenerational post-colonial harm and despair, and then you link it to the movie, okay, where it's about that despair of wanting to belong, and how do you don't care what choices you make to belong because you're trying to short-circuit that despair. And who wouldn't want to short-circuit that despair, right? So for me, we won't get very far even with looking at suicide and self-harm behaviors, including addiction, until we address head-on the issue of despair and can really hear that despair, you know, and not keep on saying, but you have your whole future ahead of you, you know? Because to some people, that's not positive. That's like, you know, I can't face that. Despair is not something that you can measure materially. Okay? And that's why I think we're missing the boat. So I think that the only way we can make the argument is by saying something that we were discussing, your question addressed, which is, it can be quite dangerous to separate out teenage pregnancy, self-harm, and substance abuse in certain kinds of instances, because the same factors are driving all of it.